Hello, welcome back to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. I'm starting a new book and I will continue till I finish this book. This is the first book in the trilogy, Love Endures All Things. It comes in three books, which is Love Endures All Things, Love Endures All Things Across the Creek, and Love Endures All Things The Deep South. And as I wrote these books, this one has a passion flower on it as part of the cover. This book has a Alabama river lily on it because we lived at a place that had a creek that had nearly 2,000 foot of creek frontage on our property. And when we came to the south, the Love Endure All Things, the Deep South, we had these flowers growing on this property we bought. And I was just amazed by the look of those flowers. And I wanted it on a cover of a book. And that's how it got there. Uh, this book, Love Endures All Things, is the first in the trilogy, and it contains 13 chapters. Uh, but I'm going to read the prologue because this is the book that starts telling the best part of my life, all three of these books. And it wasn't easy to get to the best part of my life, but once it started, I was so glad for what it was. The prologue says, "This is the third in a 5 book series that tells the whole story of my strange life. I was lonesome most of my life until I found Miss Stephanie. I came from a large family with 5 sisters and my parents, but the lonesomeness was with me for much of my growing up. When I met Miss Stephanie, I was head over heels in love. I started asking her to marry me by the third date. My love was overpowering and deep within my heart. I thought she was the prettiest little lady I had ever seen. Stephanie was the best thing to ever happen to this old boy. I knew I was blessed when she responded with the affirmative. I would tell her, I love you, and she would answer with, same here. That's kind of funny. It took a while to get her to say, I love you back to me. We did love each other. We were both the best friends to each other, and sometimes the only friend to each other. This is a story of true love and dedicated love to one another. I hope you enjoy the telling of our story. I dedicate this story to Miss Stephanie Georgina Minzak Jones. She was born in San Francisco, California, to a mother who was an English war bride. She held us together like she was born to it. I shall always love her. The first chapter in this book is entitled Carried Away. I lived this story and I am blessed by the events that led to the point of true love. I was born the second in a family of 7 children. I was the only boy for 14 years before my little brother came along. I also had a little sister that came along after him. We older children were almost a separate generation because we were for the most part, teenagers by the time the last two came along. I started equal with my sister, but the difference in personalities between boys and girls soon became evident, and I became an outsider to the girls. Although I was welcome most of the time, they simply played differently, and I only joined them sometimes. I spent much of my playtime alone. I had many adventures without my sisters and some with them. I grew up noticing that my father was a little cold and distant from me. I never knew why until later years. I was not treated like my sisters, but that gave me an inner strength that carried me through some things, and it gave me a weakness that it seems that I passed on to my own children. Well, as we start the story of true love, let's get the difficulties out of the way first. I wasn't exactly the kind of son most parents would want their high school son to be. I was ditching school almost every Friday, or at least on Friday afternoon. John, a good friend I had met through Mike, my best friend and longest friend, John and I attended Downey High School in Modesto. It was a little more high class than Modesto High School, which I had attended before. John and I had decided we needed to we needed a 3-day weekend every week, and so we devised a very sure way to get Friday off. When I had attended Modesto High School, I had a friend that would skip one Friday every couple of months, and that looked like a good idea to me. So I told John about it, and he also thought it was a very good idea. John and I decided that it was a good idea to take every Friday off until our luck ran out. School started on Thursday, and we instituted our plan by the next Friday. He and I had both worked all summer, and we thought we deserved some extra time off after school started. As the weekend started on Monday, or as the week started on Monday morning, we both went to the office and talked to the principal about going to the Navy recruiter on Friday and talked to them about the service. He agreed rather too quickly because both John and I were just below average students. It seemed that he thought we might not make it through anyway. With our plans set, we enjoyed the first full week of school, knowing that we were getting off Friday anyway, and we would have a short week for several weeks. We had already talked about the following week and which one of the recruiters we would the go to each of the weeks. Friday rolled around and I left like I was going to school in my pickup, and John caught the bus, and I grabbed him before he went into the building, and we were off. We had not planned very well, but we drove around for 2 hours, and about 10, we went to the Navy recruiter and spent about an hour there talking to him. We drove around in the country most of the rest of the day, and we got tired of that before the day was up. I was glad to see the end of the school day arrive, and I took John back to school and I went home. I can't speak for John, but I was starved when I got home, and Mom made me wait for Dad to come home about 6 o'clock before I could eat. That made a very long day, 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. A teenage boy could starve to death in that time. I wasn't going to be caught that way again. I carried pop and snacks with me after that, and I told John to do the same. The next 4 weeks, we spent only half of every Friday off, but we were pushing our luck beyond what we should. The principal called the recruiter to talk, and the recruiter called my father and told him what I was doing. The third week was fine, and unknown to us what was went on beyond our knowledge. On the fifth Friday, we started with the Navy recruiter again and spent very little time with him before we left. I had a good Friday afternoon off and went home as usual. Dad asked how school went when he came home. I thought it was not like him to care, but I didn't think much past that. Dad didn't let on that he knew what was going on with me. I think he was giving me the chance to tell him what I had been doing. He was an authoritarian, and I was afraid of him a little, so I didn't want to tell him. Saturday morning came. Dad came and got me up at 7 a.m. and had me eat breakfast. He said, after breakfast, we're going to town. I thought he had something to do and he needed my help. So when we arrived at the recruiter's office, I knew I had been found out. When we went to the office, I learned that Dad had talked to the recruiter several times that week and they had become friends. They had evidently served on the same ship many years apart. Dad had the papers filled out, and all that was required was my signature, and it was done. Dad said, "This is what you wanted, wasn't it?" I was afraid to tell him I was just doing this to skip school. I signed it, and Dad and the recruiter sat down and talked for another half hour. When the bus pulled up out front, I was put on the bus for San Francisco. I pulled out of Modesto by 10:30 a.m. and I was at the testing center by 12. I tried to fail every test they put me through and I could not. I spent the whole afternoon at the center and by late day I was told to go to the YMCA and I would be spending the night there. Just before they sent us over there, they swore us in. As they told everyone, as they told everybody to hold up their hand and to be sworn in, I did not hold up my hand and thought that that might get me out of it yet. I told the first class petty officer I didn't hold up my hand and didn't swear, thinking that they would send me home. He said, "No one knows that but me." And he said, I was now in the Navy. They took us back to the testing center and kept us most of the day and put us on a bus and took us to the San Francisco airport. They put us on a small jet and we were sent to San Diego for boot camp. A bus carried us to the camp and we offloaded with a very angry man yelling at each one of us. I had never been so scared in all my life. They took us to a large room they called a barracks. There were hundreds of beds, and we were told to go to the far end and take a bunk and settle in for the night. They said the lights would be turned out in half an hour. Several times that night, the lights were turned on at the other end of this great long room, and more young men were brought in. By about 4:30 in the morning, they came in and began yelling at us to get up and get dressed. We were led outside, and the sky was just beginning to light up in the east. They made us stand on a number that was in a grid on the pavement. My number was 26. It amazes me that I can remember that. My number was 26. It would be my number the whole time I was in boot camp. Next to me was a boy from San Francisco whose name was Paul Taylor. On the other side was a boy named Gary McMillan. He was from Dallas, Texas. These boys became my dear friends. By the time they got us all lined out in it was sunup, they then began to tell us how to march and to stay in line. They were loud and sounded mean and vulgar in the words. They would stand so close to these boys, it looked like they were touching their face. These fellows were about as scary as a 17-year-old boy could ever imagine. They then made us march in 2 rows because that's the way the numbers were laid out. They tripped a couple of the guys who were a little clumsy and caused them to fall. Others were almost made to fall when they did that. We learned that they were marching us over to what they call the mess hall. I soon learned that was a place I liked to go. It was a dinner hall. These four mean men, marched us everywhere we went, and we all went together. After breakfast, they moved us to uh, the numbered line on the pavement again. This time they lined us up with the tallest guys in the front of the line and the shortest in the back. That was done because the tall boys took longer steps when they marched, and the shorter guys had to adjust their steps to keep up. I ended up staying next to Taylor and McMillan because we were about the same height. I thought to myself, what kind of terrible place had I put myself into? I thought about the last 2 days and that if I had just spoke up, I wouldn't be here. There was no one to blame because I was responsible. They marched us over to a long, wide warehouse and stood us out in front of it. They made us stick out our right arm and and push the man next to us down the line. They were teaching us how close we could be and not cause the company to trip when we marched. The arm length is how far apart we had to be to do exercises too. After a little while, when they thought we had learned how to do that, they took us in single file to the warehouse, and we were given a sea bag and all of the uniforms we would wear from then on. This took the rest of the day. We were forced to march about a mile to another part of the base. We had to carry a wide, or had to cross a wide footbridge uh, that was made of heavy timbers, and it looked very old while we continued marching. As we marched, we passed what the mean men called the Brig. It had bars over every window and door. They had recruits marching at a fast pace, almost at a run. They each had a shovel lying across their arms, which were held out in front of them. At each end of the shovel was a 2-gallon red bucket that was full of sand. It was October, and these prisoners were in a rolling sweat, and their clothes were wet. I wondered how long they had been running like that. Soon we came to the newer buildings that didn't look like World War II barracks. This part of the base was much nicer. We passed a 4-story ship set in the pavement like it was floating on water. There were recruits walking on the ship. On the right side, they walked toward the front, and on the left side, they walked toward the back. They called the right side starboard and the left side port. They also called the front the bow, and they called the back the stern. It seemed the Navy had a different name for everything. Some names couldn't be said when there were women present. That is Navy life. As we marched, we came into an area of 2-story barracks. They there were These were where we would be stationed while here. I'm sorry. The loud men told us to stop and stand at attention while they went inside. In about an hour, a chief petty officer came out and walked up to the company. He looked at each one of us. It must have taken 10 minutes for him to do that. He turned and walked to the center and faced us and began to talk. He had a gentle and calm voice. He had the appearance of being happy. He was calm and seemed to be sure of himself. I liked him at once. He introduced himself as Master Chief Petty Officer Medicic. He was 180 degrees from the men that had brought us to this point. He was going to be our company's leader, called Company Commander, or CC for short. We were so glad when the other men left and he was in charge. He used a gentle persuasion and respect to get us to do his bidding. 2 of the other men were CCs for a company at the other end of our barracks, also on the second floor. I don't know what happened to the other 2 men. All the companies compete for pennants, little flags that you carry with the big flag that had our company number on it. Our company number is 255. Had to go look at an old picture to find that number when I wrote this. We won many pennants through our efforts. The company 249 that the mean man was CC over won few, and he was always telling our company commander to be firmer with us and not so gentle. Company Commander 249 was always making his guy do push-ups and run and punishing them for every time they turned around. Some weeks after the company was formed, we had recruit leaders assigned from among ourselves. The recruit CC, company commander, was fine, but the recruit assistant CC was a real wise guy. But his name was Farmer, and he had let his power go to his head. He would walk along and slap some of the littler guys in the back of the head, and the sound would resonate in the air. It was about 6 foot tall and maybe 185 pounds, and I was 5'10" and about 125 pounds. One day, we were going to breakfast at about 5 a.m., and as he walked along my side of the line, he reached out and slapped me upside my head. I was out of line and had him on the ground so fast he slammed with a thud on the pavement. And I told him if he ever touched me again, he would watch his own blood run from his body. I didn't look mean, and I was very gentle and seemed completely harmless, but in school I had to fight often. I was the new kid in school almost every year. You learn how to defend yourself when you are put into that situation. I didn't get into trouble over that, but the smaller guys did cheer when that happened. Farmer was removed from his post that he held, and another became the assistant recruit company commander, or RCC. I think our recruit company commander was watching things unfold, and I didn't even get a talking to. For the next few weeks, things went well. We went to the ship that was stuck in the pavement and learned how the ship operates. Everybody walked in one direction. You go back on one side, you go forward on the other. You go up ladders on one side and down ladders on the other. Ships are one-way zones, especially under battle stations. Every company in boot camp has to go through firefighting school, where we go into a steel box that is a replica of a room aboard a ship, and they set a fire in the room when everybody's inside. You then have to find the fire hose, turn on the water, and extinguish the fire. When you come out from the room, you have black smoke all over your face and clothes. You smell like burning fuel. Every company is supposed to go through fire training school. My company went there and they ran out of time before we had to do it. We were always lucky like that, and the other companies were jealous. The same thing happened with the tear gas chamber. I never had to experience any of the really unpleasantness of boot camp. Our boot camp lasted 12 weeks, and we got to go home for 2 weeks before we had to report to our station. McMillan and I both got stationed on the USS Shenandoah out of Norfolk, Virginia. My friend Paul Taylor was sent to the aircraft carrier Enterprise. It was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, too. So I did see him once in a while. I talked to McMillan all the time, though. When I got out of boot camp, I went home to Modesto. I still had my 1957 Ford pickup, so I was able to visit everyone I knew. John was not in the service then, but would be not long after. He went to the Army. Mike never went into any branch of the service. I spent most of the 2 weeks there, and when I flew to Norfolk, Norfolk, Paul was on the same flight with me. I was 17 and Paul was 18, and we asked the flight attendant for a beer, and she looked at us and asked for ID. We were the only two passengers in coach, and we told her who would know, but she refused nevertheless. Lucky again. When we got to the Navy base, we didn't see each other or one another for another 6 months. I hadn't seen him since 1965. But Mac was on my ship and in the department next to mine. We did most things together. When I arrived at the ship, I climbed the gangway and was greeted by an enlisted man who was in Mac's department. He didn't like the second class petty officer who was in charge of my department. He told me to go to such and such and ask for a second class by the name of Middledorf. Not knowing any better, I went and found him playing cards with his friends. I asked for a second class named Middledorf so I could check in. Everyone began to laugh and slap the table and hit him on the back, calling him Dorf. It turned out his name was Middlecoff. He never liked me after that. So my introduction to my new boss on board wasn't what you would hope for, and it wasn't the worst I would do to him either. None of it was intentional. Middlecoff gave me the worst jobs he could muster up. He tried to write me up on many occasions and it wouldn't stick. He would make me miss liberty. This man simply didn't like me for something that another caused me to do. I decided that he was not going to relent, so after I did my 3 months as a mess cook, I tried to transfer to a signal department. The lieutenant in the signal department wanted me in his department. He told me to make out a request form and send it through the channels so I could be transferred. I carefully filled it out, and so when it was perfect, I took it to Middlecoff and asked what I needed to do to send the request through. He said to leave it with him and get back to work. I asked the lieutenant in signal department every day if it had come through, and he always had the same answer: no. He suggested I do it again after 3 weeks, and I did the same and waited another 3 weeks. He suggested I walk it through because it might be getting lost. The lieutenant suggested I let him sign it first, and he was sure it wouldn't become lost. I did just as he said. When it was filled out properly, he signed it for me, and I took it to Middlecoff, and he made me go with him to see Lieutenant Overdeck Force, of which I was part. When we got to him, Lieutenant Doty, Middlecoff, Lieutenant Doty, and Middlecoff, Lieutenant Doty. Middlecoff told Lieutenant Doty that I wanted a transfer to signal department. I had a request form, and the lieutenant asked for it and looked at it for a long time. I was sure he was considering it, and so I just stood there at attention. I stood there for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and he held the request in his hand. Then he looked up at me. He took the request and he tore it in half, and then in half again, then in a third time, and dropped it into the trash can that was sitting next to his desk. At that moment, I hated the Navy with a passion. I felt like I did when Farmer had slapped me up the backside of my head in boot camp. I decided I was going to get out of the Navy altogether. I wasn't sure, but I was going to find a way. I was sure of that. I had many friends on board, and so I would ask everybody how others got discharged from the service. One said that if you wet your bed, you were given a medical discharge. Others had other stories, but I had seen a man who had wet his bed, and some sailors took him into the head or the bathroom one night and threw a pillowcase over his head and beat him with steel wrenches that attached to every door. They call dog wrenches. He almost died, and when they took him off the ship, I never seen him again and never heard what became of him. We went on a Mediterranean cruise, and our first stop in the Med, I guess I'm about at the end of this, and our first stop at the Med, get that out of the way, there we go. We went on a Mediterranean cruise, and our first stop in the Med was Italy. I was able to transfer to boat division at that point, which was still in deck division and still under Doty. We spent 6 weeks in Naples. While in Naples, a man we call Lizard in deck division got married without the captain knowing because you need permission. We were going to move the ship to another location. Lizard when then brought the woman on board and by secret and hid her in what was called the anchor locker. Pardon me. It was a little room that the anchor chain fell into when we pulled the anchor up. The lengths of the anchor chain were about 130 pounds per link. The woman hid, the woman hidden in the anchor locker began to scream as the chain was dropped into it. The locker is a small room with a watertight door that could only be opened from the outside with dog wrenches. We heard her scream because the opening for the chain going through the floor were close to the controls. They stopped the anchor and sent a party to check out the locker, and Lizard was already there trying to get her out, but she was already dead, having been crushed by the chain with many links having hit her. Lizard went to prison in Italy. He was also discharged. When we went to Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean Sea, we spent 6 weeks there, as we did everywhere we went. We were a ship that tended to the needs of the destroyer fleet. We were a destroyer tender. While we were in Malta, Mac devised a plan whereby we could be discharged and sent back to the U.S. It was uh, instituted, and we waited. In 2 weeks, we were returned to Naples, Italy. He and I began to think the plan had failed and we would be stuck in the Navy for the duration. That's the end of this chapter. The next chapter is Homeward Bound, and it tells about the plan. And I think you'll find it interesting. The back of Love Endures All Things, I wrote, I met Stephanie within 2 weeks of getting out of the Navy. I was home, but I was so lonesome I could cry. I was seeking a lifetime companion that would be by my side until I died. I think Stephanie wanted the same thing. Her home life was awful, mother divorced, and a father that did not love her. She babysat her little sister. We started our life when I was 18 and she was 14 years old. We had our share of troubles, but we knew that love endured all things. We were apart only 3 nights in our first 15 years of marriage. We had 4 children in 6 years. We loved each other beyond measure. And then the last little paragraph down here says, I learned how to love from the girl that consented to be my wife 50 years ago. She was just as dependent upon me as I was upon her. We became each other's best friends. Stephanie was the greatest influence for good in my life. Thank you for the time you spent with me here. Next uh, presentation will be Chapter 2, Homeward Bound. And that's where I talk about the plan actually coming to fruition and what the plan was. And I think you'll enjoy that. It's got some twists and turns in it. God bless you and keep you safe from harm and from evil. And I will see you the next time I present a story. Bye bye.